Hello, I'm William Bell with allthingsfulfilled.com. Welcome to the third in our series of 7 lessons on leaving the rapture behind with 7 signs. We spoke in our first lesson on the coming of Elijah, prophesied in the Old Testament, and was fulfilled in John the Baptist, according to the New Testament and the words of Christ. Secondly, we spoke about the prophecy of Joel, which would come to pass in the last days, which Peter affirmed was fulfilled on the day of Pentecost and throughout that first century generation. Today we're going to talk about the requirement that the gospel must be preached throughout all the world as a witness to all the nations in order for the end to come, but it too likewise was to be fulfilled in the first century. In the 24th chapter of Matthew, Jesus said, "And this gospel of the kingdom must be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, then the end would come." Now, he was speaking of the end of the fall of Jerusalem, the end of the age, his coming parousia, and of the destruction of the temple in that first century generation. And here's what he assures us. In the 34th verse of Matthew 24, he says, "Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things are fulfilled." Now, Jesus is talking about the first century generation. He's not talking about the 21st century generation, as so many people have misunderstood him. Now, in Romans chapter 1 and verse 8, the Apostle Paul affirms that the gospel had in fact gone into all the world. He says, "Brethren, I thank my God for you, that your faith is spoken of throughout all the world." How could their faith be spoken of throughout all the world if the gospel hadn't gone to all the world? In chapter 10 and verse 18, in inquiry of Israel, he says, "Have they not all heard?" The response comes back, "Yes, verily, their sound is gone out into all the earth, and their words unto the end of the world." So Israel had likewise heard the gospel. It had been published in all the world. In chapter 16 and verse 26, he says, "The prophetic scriptures had been made known to all nations for the obedience of faith." In Colossians chapter 1, verses 5 and 6, Paul talked about the hope of the gospel that had been laid up in heaven for the Colossians. He says, "As it has come to you, as it has in all the world." So the gospel, the hope of the gospel, had come to the Colossians as it had in all the world. So they too received it as well as the rest of the world. In verse 23, Paul said, "If you continue in the faith and be grounded and settled, and be not moved away from the hope of the gospel, which you have heard, and which was preached to every creature which is under heaven, whereof I, Paul, am made a minister." So again, he affirms it had come into all the world to the Colossians, and it had come to all the creation. That was the requirement Jesus made in Matthew 28, verse 19, "Go teach all the nations," and Mark 16:15, "Go preach to all the creation in all the world." The apostles did it in the first century. Jesus affirmed it had to be done for the end to come, and he assured us that the end would come within that first century generation. Luke 21, verses 20 through 22, he says, "When you see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that its desolation is near. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled." And in verse 32, once again, "Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things are fulfilled." Those were the words of Christ, clear, compact, and concise, that the end came within the first century. So we can't be looking for an end in the 21st century. Nothing that we're hearing today about the end time, whether it's in the tabloids, the TV movies, or with the televangelists, refer to anything Jesus said. All of his words were fulfilled in the first century. I'm William Bell with allthingsfulfilled.com. Visit our website at www.allthingsfulfilled.com if you'd like to learn more. Stay tuned for lesson number 4. We'll see you soon.